Well, g'day and welcome to another episode of BlankCanvasTV.com. My name's Andre Knott and we are changing the way you see and experience art. Now today we're in the Vatican City. We're not in Rome, well we are in Rome, but we're not in Italy. We're in the Vatican City. It's the smallest state in the world. It has about 1,000 people living here, all members of the Catholic Church and of course the administrators of the Catholic Church around the entire world. But I thought, what better place to be talking about art and art history and art culture than right here, because right here stands some of the greatest works in art history from the Renaissance, and of course by Raphael and Michelangelo, among many others. And we've got Bernini, and of course the sculptures you see on St. Peter's Basilica behind me right here, of the 13 sculptures you see at the top there of Christ and each of the 12 apostles, of course of St. Peter and St. Paul there in the background as well. We have the obelisk, and of course the incredible square around me right here that was designed by Bernini back in the Counter-Reformation. And we're talking at the time of about the 1560s through the 1580s, sorry, 1660s through the 1680s in the time of the Baroque. However, today we're going to talk about the two great men of the Renaissance, two of the three. Of course, there was Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Buonarroti, and of course Raphael himself. And those two great men, of course, Michelangelo and Raphael, is where we're going to focus on today. First of all, Michelangelo. Among the many other great things he did in art, of course, he was born in Florence, in the Florence area, and that's where the Renaissance really took hold under the Medicis, right there in Florence. And we talk about that on another episode, but Michelangelo himself, among the many other great things he did in his career and his life in the world of art, architecture and literature and all the rest, was this right behind me right here, the cupola of St. Peter's Basilica. When you have a look at that, it stands about 150 meters in the air, and it was in the very last years of his life, when he was 88 and going on almost 89, that he designed the cupola. He never lived to see it finished, but he did the design and of course part of the construction of it at that stage. But they were some of the one of the great legacies that he left. But the things that he is most known for are of course his sculpture and his painting. He was a very reluctant painter. Many people think that of course he was the magnificent master of the great works of the Sistine Chapel right behind me here. In fact, the Sistine Chapel is right behind the obelisk right here, to the right of the St. Peter's Basilica there. And that was, of course, the Sistine Chapel, named after Pope Sixtus IV, and of course commissioned by Julius II. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But most people think he was a great painter. Of course, he was a great sculptor. And he was a sculptor primarily. In fact, he was a very reluctant painter. But of course, the great man was, he could actually see sculptures in the stone. That's how good he was as an artist, as an artisan of stone and of sculpture in general. But his most famous works, of course, were David, the colossal statue of David that stands, and my favorite statue anywhere in the world, and sculpture work right there in Florence. And of course his Pieta, La Pieta, which is of course the Virgin Mary holding her son, her dead son, Christ, before he was resurrected, that stands right inside the basilica right here as well. Under very, well, not intense light. It's actually been very well lit so that it doesn't actually fade, and it's also behind glass so it can't be touched anymore, because over the centuries it's actually worn down. It's actually, the sculpture itself is worn down. It's become very smooth because so many people touched it. It was such an icon of the Renaissance and then going forward as well into the modern day. But Michelangelo had a lot of torment in his life. I mean, it was amazing that he actually came to Rome itself, because he came to Rome at the age of 21. That's after having learned and studied in Florence, and of course under the tutelage of the great masters there, but also at the commission of the Medici family. Well, there was trouble afoot in Florence, and he came to Rome at the age of 21. He was actually commissioned by Pope Julius II for the painting of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Now, Michelangelo says that was at the request of Bramante, who was the the architect and designer, and also Raphael himself, because Raphael was a phenomenal painter at that stage and very much a favourite of Julius II, and he was actually commissioned to do other works. However, Michelangelo was not a painter at all. He had never painted anything in his life almost, and he believed that it was Raphael and Bramante's way of showing him up as an artist, and showing him up for his talent for sculpture, of course, but his talent as an artist, as a painter. And he thought that this was an opportunity for Raphael to show his own prowess to the Pope and to everyone else in the city. And there was a lot of battles that ensued between Raphael and Michelangelo over the years. But in the 1965 film, The Agony and the Ecstasy, a lot of the interplay between Julius II and Michelangelo was actually played out in that film. And of course it's a dramatization, but many people say that it's very, very close to the truth, because Michelangelo himself was the very first man in recorded art history who ever said no to a pope. Of course, the Pope was like the leader of the known world at the time. It was hardly the free world, but it was the known world at the time, and it was like saying no to almost God himself right here on earth. And that was a big no-no, of course, at the time, and almost under threat of death, he actually completed the Sistine Chapel ceiling. It depicts the 9 scenes of the Genesis story. First of all, of the creation, second of all, of man's exile with Adam and Eve, and third of all, in man's humanity with Noah and his family going into the latter parts of the Genesis story. And it's a phenomenal painting. It's one of the greatest works in all of art history. And remember, this was coming from a man who had never painted